Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough, and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Okay, Marianne, I want to talk about a very interesting subject that I'd rather not talk about.
Okay.
You and I discussed this off the air, and this is where I want to go into my defense mechanism and be the one asking the questions so I don't have to talk.
Okay.
But let's describe our teenage years for our listening audience. This is, and I want to avoid this like everything in my being, you know. How would other people say you were as a teenager? How would they describe your looks, your actions? What were your interests? Give us the down and dirty here.
Well, it was hard. And I'm with you. It's sometimes I just kind of want to put that season out of my life and out of my mind and just pretend it didn't happen, but it did. And today's interview is, Ryan is so passionate about Generation Now and leveraging influence and world change with this generation. And to be honest with you, I wish that I would have maximized my walk with Jesus and certain moments when I was a teenager, but I didn't. I will just tell you, and I don't want to draw this out like we have in the past, but I will tell you my last name was Moranis. And I am going to share that on the podcast. That was my last name on my birth certificate. And so for all of my youth pastor friends and children's ministry friends out there that have gone into junior high mindset with my last name, I want you to know that I went through years of trauma because I was ruthlessly bullied with my last name. And because of that, people pleasing was as a girl, teenage girl who's trying to find her place and identity. I people pleased my way through high school, which did not lead me down a path that was productive or helpful. I will tell you, I am redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, and there is no piece of my past that I let or shame that defines my story. But I will tell you, my teenage years were very difficult, and I went my own way for a minute. Yeah. So that was part of my story. What about yours?
Oh, my goodness. Mine was not necessarily of rebellion outwardly. I was in a Christian home and was in church and in a Christian school. But I will quickly tell you, because you're in a Christian school does not mean it has higher values than other places. I think it teaches you how to hide your rebellion.
Wow.
And so there were things that I got into that nobody really knew, not horrible. And I was generally a good kid, but my problem was I was an introvert. And then layer that with, there's no way I say this other than I was a zip plantation. I hate my senior photos. I was constantly dealing with treatment. And so, that just breeds wonderful date opportunities left and right, so no, all of those layers, in there, like, it was tough, you're already struggling with your self-image. You're struggling with that. I was not super athletic. I mean, I did well, I did okay, participated, but that was not my strength. And I never played a musical instrument. So, as I heard Ryan in this interview, I actually thought through how I struggled with my own value system of my self-value, that is. I kind of poured myself into goals and competitions that were non-athletic and non-musical. If I could excel and do something, then that overcame my appearance and my awkwardness. And it kind of just shaped who I am. And I think some of that pours over even into today. You know, I'll second guess my own self abilities or self appearance or any one of those number of items. So, you know, I'll overcompensate by pouring myself into another task or another area. So yeah, I just would like to hit the delete button and skip right past all those teen years. No, that's
this. Candor and transparency is what this podcast is about. So I'm thankful that you shared that. I want to also say, you know, we grew up in a time where the digital age was non-existent. And so I'm just trying to fathom what my life would have been like with this, basically this buffet is how I want to call it. What I want to call it is this buffet of digital absorption. And that's one of the things he addresses early on in the interview. And I can't fathom my life with the digital age. I look at my kids and go, you know, there's pieces of your world and you're growing up that I don't understand.
Yes. Aren't you glad that if we lived in the teenage years with the social media and somewhat of the permanent record, because it creates a permanent record.
It does.
I'm so thankful. I just mentioned I wanted to delete my teenage years. On the flip side, I'm so glad nobody can go back and see what I was thinking, how I would have said something, the crassness that maybe would have come out of my mouth in ways that as I look back, I was embarrassed over growing up in the Deep South, things that, you know, I didn't think I was a little more than what I'd like to admit. Thank goodness, I, as you said, been very much redeemed, very much taken a whole different shift in God's humanity and what goes on. But man, I'm with you. People who are called to student ministry, like Ryan and others that we've had on this podcast, they are incredibly equipped, insightful, and I'm thankful that they're out there leading, not only, and hear it in his interview, leading the young people, but leading in the other adults who help them lead.
Yes. Yes. I want to encourage you, ministry leaders, as we listen to this here in just a moment. He really talks about the partnership between parents and he as a youth pastor. And I think that's something to lean in on and listen to. I also would love for you to listen in to his passion for let's disciple this generation now, not disciple them for the future, disciple them for the present. And I just want you to lean in and think about that. And we will come back on the other side of the interview and process a little bit more.
Registration for D6 2023 is now open. For a limited time, you can take advantage of the absolute best pricing for the D6 conference if you register now. The earlier you register, the more you save. Last year's conference sold out, so don't wait long to take advantage of this offer. Join us for the 2023 D6 Conference, April 10th to 12th at the Marriott World Center in Orlando, Florida. This year's theme is All In, all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Register now at d6conference.com.
Ryan Garrett is the husband of Megan and the father of 3 children. He longs to make Jesus' name famous by ongoing disciple making. He is the lead student minister at LifePoint Church in Smyrna, Tennessee, and he lives by the phrase, love God, reach people, make disciples. Ryan, thanks for being here today.
Man, I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, before we get going, I think we got to get something out of the way and say that between the two of us, we probably both have the 2 best sets of hair at this conference.
I agree. I have, that's us, bro.
And for the listeners that can't see, just trust me on that one. And for the people that are watching on video, you know I'm a liar right now because I don't have any. But Ryan is rocking it right now.
I've got enough for the both of us. How about that?
Yeah. Share some later, please. And the beard, too. I mean, you just got it all.
I do extra mouth pushes just to grow the beard and the hair out a little bit more. 10 reps a day. It gets a little thicker, so that's just out.
Well, the topic today, we're talking about the best beard oil to use.
Oh.
So No, actually we're not. But later we do need to talk. We're talking today about helping our teens see that they're part of Generation Now and not Generation Next. I've heard you say that this generation has the potential to make a bigger impact on the world than any generation before. What makes this generation of teenagers so unique?
Well, it goes back to a little bit about my story growing up. God saved me when I was 9, and I got called into ministry between my junior and senior year. And in that senior year of high school, I had one goal, was just to be a popular kid. Like that was before Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything like that. And so I just wanted to be one of the popular kids. And I was known as the weatherman in my high school. And so looking back, everybody in my high school knew me as the weatherman. But God had saved me when I was 9, called me into ministry in between my junior and senior year that summer. And at the end of my senior year, it was like the Holy Spirit popped me in the back of the head and just said, Ryan, you wasted your senior year. I called you into ministry before your high school career ended, not when you're 25, not after you were married, not after you had kids, not after you went to school, all that stuff. I called you now. And in that moment, the Lord just really solidified his calling into student ministry, because students have they're in the biggest mission field they'll ever be in, middle school and high school. And now with the invention of social media and everything that's going on with the platforms they have, they can use that access because they have so many followers. If they use it in the right way, they can have a tremendous impact for the kingdom. But unfortunately, it's just trying to get them to use it the right way and not see it as something as it really shouldn't be. I mean, it can be used for good if it's used right.
Yeah, and I want to stay there for a second, because each generation that comes along seems to be more and more tech savvy and more social media savvy. It's so easy for us just to slam social media and just say it is terrible, we don't need it, it just brings us down, it's awful, it's political, blah, blah, blah. But how have you seen today's generation use it for something good?
Well, I have to say, and I'm just being honest, it's probably more fewer than far between for the good, but it is out there. And when it's out there, you got to celebrate. You got to lean in. You got to encourage those students and tell them great job when they're doing something right. Because we've been hearing at D6, these students are constantly berated with, like, they're not good enough. They're not smart enough. They don't know enough. They don't have, but they know a lot, and they see a lot. And as they're growing up in the church, hopefully we're doing our jobs as ministers to pour into those students to be able to reach them with the gospel, and the gospel being the center of it all, and them use their voice on social media and their platforms that they're on for the kingdom. You know, the majority of our teenagers nowadays, and it's not just teenagers, it's adults too. I mean, I've got a friend of mine who's got a saying that adults are just teenagers with bills. So they deal with the same stuff. It's just they have something to pay.
I'd agree with that.
And so you know, these teenagers, if they understand that it's more than just a like, that they're going on, if they're on their social media and they're, you know, evaluating what they post, and they say, okay, well, I didn't get enough likes on that, and so they delete it. So they're finding their identity in their social media, and that's what I've seen in student ministry over the years, especially since 2012, 2013, when social media just really blew up. I mean, it's grown where their identity is found in their device and not in God. But those students who are grounded in their faith, those who are bought in to the gospel, can use their voices on social media and all the followers that they have, because they have so many followers, and point them to Jesus, and because they have an active audience, because they're on social media all the time. I know parents know that.
Yeah.
I mean, if they got paid for as much time they're on social media, holy cow, they'd have, millions of dollars in the bank.
Yeah.
But they could use that for good. So there are good sides of social media and tech. We just need to lean into them as a church and help our students navigate to those areas where, hey, this isn't really all bad if you use it with the gospel in mind.
And I love that you talked about the need to encourage them when they do it right. Because I think we forget that sometimes, that it's all about, we find ways to criticize them when they've done something wrong or when they've done something bad, and that stands out a lot, but we often forget that when they are using it the right way and doing things the right way, or they're encouraging another friend, they're sharing the gospel, sometimes we're silent on that. And so I'm so glad you said that, because I know for me personally, that's what I forget. I don't see the good sometimes. I only see the bad, and I think it's important that we still catch the good.
Well, I try to tell our students that I'm okay with being number 3. Like I'm okay with being a number 3 guy in your life. Jesus being number 1, your earthly father being number 2. I don't ever want to replace that. But number 3, I'm going to come and I'm going to be your biggest fan, and I'm going to cheer you on. And because some of our students, they don't have that number 2, and some students try to replace me with their number 2 spot because their dad in their home is not really encouraging or loving or caring. And so I want to say, whoa, God's put you in that family for a reason. Look for how you can minister to your dad. Look how you can minister to your family and through what God's doing in your life. And so I'm okay with being number 3. I want to lift them up. I want to encourage them, but I also want to be a huge fan of theirs, and I want to be on their side because Jesus is.
Yeah, that's great. There's 2 words that I want to focus on for a few minutes. The words are equip and encourage. You've spoken about how essential it is for this generation to be equipped and encouraged by the right leaders. Let's start with that word equipped. What does it look like to equip this generation?
I think students who have leaders who will lead this generation now, if they'll lead them with character, they'll lead them with conviction. They'll lead them with Christ. They're pouring that into them, and they're not scared to talk about the hard things. They're not scared to talk about the easy things. They're not scared to talk about wrath. They're not scared to talk about grace. They're presenting the whole gospel to them. When you have a teenager that will accept that and understand that, equipping is kind of easy because you're just discipling. I mean, you look at what Jesus did for the 3.5 years that he was on this earth. He just discipled those teenage guys. You know, most of them were teenagers, those teenage guys, to follow after him as he did the will of the Father. And ultimately went to the cross, and you know, they a lot of them were martyred themselves, and man, they followed Jesus, and in his footsteps, they laughed with Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They cried with Jesus. They prayed with Jesus. When they stay awake, they went everywhere with Jesus. And they got to experience them, and our teenagers can have the same. And as us as youth pastors, as youth leaders, children's workers, whatever you want to call us, but equipping is the discipling. And as we are living life, taking folks with us, but totally pointing to the gospel, totally pointing to Jesus and everything that we say and do. That's where the equipping comes in, and it's fun, man.
I like that.
It's a blast.
That is good to hear right there. It's not work if you think about why you're doing it. And that takes us to the second word, encourage. And you've talked about this a little bit already about being their biggest fan, their number 1 fan, which it's so needed today. And that's needed in any capacity, not just ministry, but especially in ministry. In some other ways, what does that look like in a practical sense? How can we encourage our teenagers today?
I think if we can, a couple of different ways. I think if we can get more adults to encourage them as well. So us at our church at LifePoint, we have some amazing youth leaders and youth workers, and they're leading their life groups and pouring into them week in, week out as they have other people going, hey, you can do this. You can live this out. You can walk this faith out outside of these walls. But that's the kicker. It doesn't stay in the walls. I mean, there's 168 hours in a week. We maybe see them for 2 of those hours. So to think that we're going to have the max impact in those 2 hours, and that's if we're lucky, we have 2 hours. And so to think that we're going to have the max impact in their lives just for those 2 hours, we need to broaden our thinking a little bit. So that means encourage them going to football games, going to baseball games, going to ballet recitals and sitting with parents. I know nothing about the ballet.
I'm shocked.
I know, as you can tell, I know nothing about the ballet. But if I can sit next to a mom and dad while they're cheering their kids on, while I can cheer them on as well, and not know anything about it, but let them know, hey, we're here. You know, students coming over to our house and opening up our home. And last night, you know, with me being here at D6, my wife was at home. I think there was like 10 teenagers over at our house hanging out, goofing off. And opening up your home My wife's just loving on and encouraging them. And that's what we want to do. So it's more than just inside the walls of the church. It's outside too. They need that encouragement as much as they can. And if they can see someone who is chasing after Jesus, who's not perfect, who makes mistakes. I was telling a friend of mine, one of our interns that's with us this week, I want students to, this is going to sound really weird, but I want our students to see my wife and I get in a disagreement and see how we handle that in a biblical way, because some of them are coming from war zones. Their moms and dads are just going at it. But if they can see us, now, granted, my wife and I don't argue all the time, but if we do, we're not perfect. If we do, we want to handle that in a biblical way where our students can see, hey, there is hope. Because life is not perfect. When they get married one day, they're going to have a disagreement. It's one thing to throw a plate across the room, but it's another thing to say, whoa, let's think about what we're doing. And they can receive that in an encouraging way. So it's just living life and just encouraging students along the way.
Yeah, I love that. And when you were talking about the encouragement, one thing that came to mind is all the people from my church growing up that came to see my basketball games and came to see recitals and just school plays and things like that. And they weren't necessarily full-time staff. Some of them were volunteers. Some of them they were older couples in the church, maybe in their 70s, and they showed up, and that made such an impact. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not on staff at a church, it doesn't matter.
That's right.
Be there.
Go. Yes.
Yeah. Man, I love that you shared that. So sometimes we hear people kind of slip up and they say, today's teenagers are the church of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll say, no, you're the church of right now, but that's as far as it goes. What can our churches do as a whole to help today's generation truly feel like they are a part of the church right now?
Well, I think one way for a student to feel like they are a part of the church that's going on right now is to be a part of the church in the serving aspect. It's one thing to just sit and soak it up for a couple hours a week. It's another thing to actually go, okay, not only am I a part of this church, I can serve in this church. I can serve God in this capacity. So we want God to save them. We want God to radically change their lives. But we don't want them just to find life. We want them to live sin as well. We want them to go out in the world. And that doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be across the country or across the world. It can be serving in kids' church. It can be serving in the nursery. It can be I have some of our high schoolers that serve in our middle school ministry, teaching them now that you don't have to wait till you're out of this ministry to serve. You can do that right now. And I've found and I've seen over the years that God's allowed me to do student ministry. Those students who are serving and who are they're bought in for the future. And there are more students that stick around after high school if they've been given an opportunity to serve in their church now. And so I would say, hey, if we're going to keep them, we got to give them a spot. And don't just use them as free babysitting either. Yeah. We can't do that. There's nobody else to do. We'll call the teenagers in. No, let's call the teenagers in and teach them and model them how to hold a baby in nursery. And not just hold the baby, but pray for the salvation of that baby. That changes everything, man. When they're holding a child and going, maybe one day because of I'm getting choked up thinking about it. I mean, holding a baby, thinking one day this child might get saved. For a teenager, that could be impactful, bro.
Man, that is rich. That is great. And kind of on that same note, what role can parents play in helping their kids and teens see that, you are a part of the church right now?
Yeah, I say encouragement on the same scale. Partnership with the church is super huge and super valuable. I want to meet with our parents. I want to listen to how I can partner with them, and hopefully, because I see them with just a few hours a week, the teenagers, just a few hours a week, we're speaking the same language. So if I can maybe disciple or pour in, encourage those parents and help them out, whatever's going on, they're hearing the same things at church. Man, that's a great marriage and ministry. Because I know what I'm teaching at church, and it's the Bible, and I'm hoping that same thing is happening at home. And if I can, lean into those parents, love on those parents with the same thing that I'm teaching their kids, and something's going to work out through the Spirit. It's not going to be me; it's going to be God's Word. So,
well, this has been great. There's just so much valuable information here. I thank you for being here. I thank you for sharing this with us. So much practical information that you just shared that I think we can take and apply it today. So. Thank you.
Man,
just
thank you.
Awesome stuff.
Awesome. Go God.
If you missed this year's D6 conference, or if you want to relive it, we have good news for you. With the D6 Media Vault, now you can enjoy over 100 audio MP3s from the 2022 D6 conference, as well as videos of 14 main stage speakers, all for just $199. Think of this resource as your ministry coaching audio library. Choose from nearly 100 talks on parenting, marriage, family, broken families, leadership, grandparenting, apologetics, volunteers, special needs, social media, and more. Plus, many of the topics will help coach leaders in age-specific ministries like preschool, children, students, college, adults, and families. You will also receive videos of all 14 of our main stage speakers, providing insight into family ministry and generational discipleship. This offer is good for a limited time only. Head to d6conference.com now to purchase.
And I'm going to start with what he finished with, or close to the end, and we can work our way back. Just because he just dealt with this, he is big on discipleship, which we tend to think about, let's take God's word and show people what they aspire to. But at the end, he says, I want the kiddos, the teenagers, to be able to see how he and his wife argue and disagree. That's taking the perceived negative, but how it can be done in a healthy way. That's valuable. I wish my parents had shown me how they argue. My parents divorced when I was 14, but I never saw them argue. And so I didn't really learn how to argue healthy in our marriage. And so my wife and I, early in our marriage, had to see counseling over how do we deal with disagreements, because I didn't have it modeled correctly for me. That is discipleship. Let me ask you, how did you see how to deal with the difficulties, as a teenager? How did you learn those adult things as a teenager that Ryan's talking about?
I will tell you, similar to the way he disciples God faithfully in the redeeming years, meaning 18 on, God has strategically placed incredible women in my life. And I will never forget this woman who was such a disciple maker in my life at 18. She would head to Walmart and she would call me. It was actually probably between 18 and 20 for me years old, but she would call me and she's like, I'm pulling into Walmart, meet me there. And she would disciple me up and down the aisles while she's shopping. And we would talk about everything from sin, confession, repentance, life, college, ethics, all of the things while she's getting her groceries. The woman poured truth and life into me down the aisles of Walmart. And it didn't really cost her. I mean, yes, she's having to be intentional to listen to me and, pour truth into me, but she's shopping.
I wonder how many more items she purchased as a result of it.
I'm sure tons. But listen, I
love this woman. She redeemed her time and poured into you.
I mean, that is how I was discipled. Life on life, just exactly what our friend just mentioned about sharing your life, showing those around you how to fight, how to argue, how to struggle well.
Yeah. As men, we don't tend to find those mentors. Most of us don't early in our life. Not at 18. We think we've got it figured out. We're not listening to very many people. So, if you as a youth pastor, children's pastor, whatever, challenge your emerging adults coming out of your teenage years to not let go of those coaches and call them whatever you want to. Nomenclature is irrelevant. Coaches, mentors, whomever it is, but challenge them to identify 3 or 4 and have those Walmart experiences wherever God lets you have it.
Yes.
And invite them into your worlds. That's so good. I loved how Ryan said, when he said it out loud, I'm like, where's he going with this? He said, I want to be the number 3 in my teens' lives. And he was quick to point out he was not there to be the substitute for dad or mom.
That's right.
I love that, because oftentimes student pastors make mom and dad look uncool.
Yeah.
And I didn't hear that from his heart.
No.
And if you're a student pastor out here, you need to find first partnership with the parents and then with the teens. It shouldn't be partnership with the teen against the parents in any way, shape, or form. But I loved how he did that and says, hey, I'm just going to show up in your world. I'm going to be your biggest champion. It wasn't about just teaching and training. It was about affirming.
No.
I needed somebody like that in my life that was regular. I had the teachers, but I didn't have the people who just showed up and was there in the way that he is describing in that era of my life.
I'm raising a 15-year-old right now, and I just want to say, in light of Ryan's podcast, I have a phenomenal youth pastor who comes alongside, and there's times Xander and I lock horns about everything. And I mean everything, guys, except for maybe food and music. And my youth pastor faithfully, he says it. He says the same thing I'm saying. And he mentions this in the podcast where as youth pastors, you need to be speaking the same language as parents. And I want to reiterate what Ron said. Scripture is very clear to honor your father and mother. Yeah. As adults, we should never be dividing our students against their families, period. Scripture's clear about
if they're not believers.
That's
even
right.
If they're not in church, you do not step into that biological role.
That's right. And he reiterates when Xander can't hear me, he can hear Stephen. My youth pastor's name is Stephen. He can hear him. He's saying the same thing I'm saying, but because Stephen has got the relational equity, shows up out at track, shows up at our dinner table once a week. We have family dinner night. My youth pastor's invited to I want him in my house. Yes. I want him in our life because here's the thing. Sometimes Xander can't hear me. There's going to be a nice long season where he can't hear me and chat, but he can hear Stephen. It's a partnership. And I love that he used that language. Youth pastors, you will have great, great influence in world change. And I mean this from my bones.
Yes.
You will have great impact on world change if you will fight to work at connecting with your parents, listening to your parents, ministering to your parents, and championing and supporting your students.
Exactly. You know, if you can make the parent who's not in church of that teen still feel valued, and you thank them for allowing your time with their son or daughter. Thank them for letting the church be a part of their life.
Yeah.
And then share with them what you're teaching via text or an email or a note card or whatever. You work to build that relationship with that parent. It's going to make all the difference in the life of that teenager you're working with, but also in sharing the gospel with that parent. Be intentional ministering to the parents of your kiddos.
Can I just address too, in light of that, I just had this thought and I wanted to speak to it, to the youth pastors out there that are single or young married without children. Let me just say that I shifted as a ministry leader when I became a parent because I didn't have to think like that. You know, I didn't have to care for a being.
Yes.
But can I just challenge those that don't have children to really lean in and think about what it means to be parental and consider the parent. I think when I wasn't a parent, I dismissed the parent, if I'm being really honest. I was one that would advocate more for the student than I would for the parent, if I'm being really honest.
Yes.
And that wasn't wise on my part. I was driving really a wedge between parents and my ministry because I wanted to be the hero. And that's just me being vulnerable about my insecurity. But at the end of the day, now that I'm a parent, it shifts everything. These parents are entrusting their children into your care. And it's not so much about you being the hero as much as it's about, if we're going to honor Deuteronomy 6, it's about the parent being the hero and Jesus being the hero. And so if we could shift into thinking that way, oh man, you will get great return in your ministry if you'll think that way.
You will indeed. And I'll go a step further. I was working with a person who was wrestling with a decision that his church made in their student ministry. And the student pastor is young married, no kids. I mean, we're talking newly married, just out of, college. And the wisdom that my friend gave to this student pastor was brilliant. He said, right now you can't, as you just said, Marianne, think like a parent. He said, you need to identify 5, 6, depending on the size of your youth group. If you got a smaller group, maybe it's 2 or 3. But if you got a decent sized youth group, identify 5 or 6 couples or parents inside your youth ministry that are somewhat spiritually mature and parents of different age kids, maybe 17-year-olds, maybe 13-year-olds. And when you're thinking about the strategy and you're thinking about programming and you're thinking about some of the activities, touch base with them, bounce some ideas off of them, get their feedback before you make a big announcement or send a big email. You got to roll back and retract. Yeah. How many times have we seen that happen because it wasn't thought through from exactly what you identified, that parental mindset? Like, what was I thinking? I thought it was a great idea at the moment. Then I hit send and all of a sudden all these replies came back, I think you and I have both seen that happen in our areas.
Absolutely.
So I'm thankful for Ryan's approach. I'm thankful he's at a tremendously healthy church. He's been there a while. He's doing some amazing work. He's been a speaker at the conference for us at D6, which reminds me, once you identify those key leaders those parental leaders in your church, have them read a book with you. Whatever you're thinking, read together, plan together, take them to conferences with you. Do what it takes to develop them while you are developing yourself, and you will multiply your ministry efforts many times over.
That's right.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for that insight. We're going to pray for student ministry and parents of student ministry that are out there looking for those ways to step into their lives. And maybe you're out there and your teenagers are grown. I would challenge you to volunteer your time back down at student ministry. It doesn't have to be every week, but you can just lean in and say, hey, when you're doing some activity or whatever, I want to be there. I want to go on your field trip, or I want to drive a van, or whatever it is. Just offer your time to be present.
Yes.
It might not even be doing something. It will be incredibly helpful. Well, next week we have a guest, and you remember who our guest is, Miss Marianne?
Yes, Rachel Nemiroff. She is an artist and has some really amazing testimony of collaborating while she writes and what it looks like to be an artist on the road. So I'm looking forward to this. Interview is really fun. I will tell you that David asked some really fun questions to get to know the artist. And so Ron and I are going to tackle some of those questions too. So we look forward to our interview next week, and we're praying for you, and we will see you next week.
You've been listening to the D6 podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.